Welcome to Old Casebook. Today, we are diving into the chilling case of the Kunz family, a story filled with mystery, fear, and unanswered questions. Let's begin. The Kunz family case still leaves many questions unanswered. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Old Casebook and press the bell icon for more true stories. Thanks for watching. Athens, Wisconsin is a small farming town where life moves slowly and predictably, the kind of place where the population barely reaches 1,000 and neighbors know each other by name. It was a quiet community where nothing ever seemed to change. But just outside the town, beyond the main roads and deep into the countryside, stood a farmhouse that felt almost forgotten. Positioned at the intersection of quiet gravel roads and surrounded by thick woodland and open land, the house was in poor condition, weathered, worn down, and lacking even the most basic modern comforts. There was no indoor plumbing, no proper heating system, only the bare minimum needed to survive. This was where the Kunz family lived. They were known in the area, but not in the way most families were. They kept to themselves, rarely socializing and avoiding attention. When they did interact with others, it was brief and distant. Their clothing was outdated, worn from years of use, and their habits remained private. Their lives were largely hidden from the outside world, and over time, they became something of an anomaly in the community. People who were seen, but never truly known. While much of the country celebrated Independence Day with fireworks and gatherings, something far darker was unfolding at the Kunz farmhouse. From the outside, there were no immediate signs of disturbance, no calls for help, no witnesses reporting anything unusual. It wasn't until later that the truth began to surface. When a relative, Kenneth Kunz, arrived at the property and stepped inside, he was met with a scene of unimaginable violence. Inside the home, 4 members of the Kunz family had been killed. Clarence Kunz, 76 years old, was found in a bedroom. Irene Kunz, 81, remained seated in a chair, her body still upright. Marie Kunz, 72, lay near the entrance of the house, and Randy Kunz, just 30 years old, was discovered on the kitchen floor. Each of them had suffered a single close-range gunshot wound to the head. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of chaos or panic. The positioning of the bodies suggested that whatever had happened, it had unfolded quickly and without warning. As investigators processed the scene, one detail became impossible to ignore. Helen Kunz, 70 years old, was missing. Her absence raised immediate and unsettling questions. Even more disturbing was what they found inside the home. An abundance of pornographic material was scattered throughout the property, from magazines to VHS tapes. Soon, rumors began to surface, hinting at deeply inappropriate and troubling relationships within the family. Kenneth was born to Helen when she was only 15 years old, under circumstances that were deeply troubling from the very beginning. A neighbor had already been convicted of having sexual relations with her while she was underage. Yet Kenneth himself believed there was more to the story. He suspected that his real father might have been Clarence, his mother's own brother. He even believed that Randy could have been fathered by Clarence as well. These disturbing possibilities added a new layer of complexity to an already confusing case, leaving authorities unsure how to interpret what they were learning. At first, investigators didn't know what to make of these details. In a case this unusual, every possibility had to be considered. They questioned whether Helen herself might have been another victim who had been taken from the home, or if she had somehow managed to escape. There was even the unsettling possibility, however unlikely it seemed, that she could have been involved in what had happened. With no clear answers, the investigation expanded in multiple directions as detectives worked to piece together what might have unfolded inside that isolated farmhouse. Search efforts grew more intense as authorities tried to determine whether Helen was still alive or if she had suffered the same fate as the others. Inside the home, investigators encountered conditions that were difficult to comprehend. The house was cluttered, deteriorating, and showed clear signs of long-term neglect. It was obvious that the family had been living in isolation for many years, but what stood out most was not just the state of the home, it was what had been hidden inside it. Officers discovered large amounts of cash scattered throughout the property, tucked away in different places. Altogether, it totaled roughly $20,000. This finding immediately challenged one of the most common motives in crimes like this. If robbery had been the goal, why leave the money behind? It pointed towards something far more personal. As the investigation continued, more details about the Kunz family's private lives began to surface. Stories spread quickly, both within the local community and beyond. Their isolation, their unusual living conditions, and the allegations surrounding their relationships became the focus of intense discussion. Some of these claims were never proven, while others were rooted in long-standing rumors. Regardless of their truth, they began to shape the narrative of the case. Slowly, attention shifted away from the brutality of the murders and toward the family themselves, the way they lived, the choices they made, and how different they appeared from everyone else. In many ways, the victims became overshadowed by the story surrounding them. For a long time, the investigation made little progress. There were no major breakthroughs, no clear suspects, and still no sign of Helen. Then, miles away from the Kunz home, in a remote marshland, authorities made a grim discovery. Human remains were found and later identified as Helen Kunz. She had been shot in the head, just like the others. With that, investigators confirmed what they had feared all along. All 5 members of the Kunz family had been murdered. Attention eventually turned to a man named Christopher Jacobs III, a young local farmer with a history of minor criminal activity. He had previously interacted with the Kunz family and had even purchased a car from them, making him one of the few outsiders known to have had direct contact with the household. As investigators looked deeper, they uncovered firearms on his property, including weapons consistent with those used in the killings, along with ammunition of the same caliber and other suspicious items. However, there was a critical issue. None of this evidence directly placed him at the scene of the crime. Jacobs was eventually charged and brought to trial, with the prosecution building its case around circumstantial evidence, including tire tracks believed to match his vehicle, shell casings found at the scene, and his connection to the family. The defense argued that this was not enough. There were no eyewitnesses, no confirmed murder weapon, and no physical evidence proving that Jacobs had been inside the house at the time of the killings. After deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. For many, the outcome was shocking, while for others, it highlighted just how fragile the case had been from the start. For years, the case remained unresolved until a new development changed everything. A former girlfriend of Jacobs came forward, claiming that he had confessed to the murders. According to her, he described going to the Kunz home, where an interaction escalated into violence. She said he shot Randy first, followed by the others, and then abducted Helen, taking her to a remote location where he ultimately killed her. Her statement became the foundation of a new case. However, a legal complication stood in the way. Because Jacobs had already been acquitted of murder, he could not be tried again for those same crimes. Prosecutors instead charged him with the kidnapping of Helen Kunz. What followed was a long and complex legal battle, with appeals questioning whether these new charges violated his rights. Eventually, the case returned to trial. This time, the prosecution relied heavily on the testimony of his former girlfriend, along with the same circumstantial evidence presented before. The defense challenged her credibility, arguing that her claims were unreliable and driven by personal motives. After deliberation, the jury reached a different verdict: guilty. Jacobs was convicted of kidnapping Helen Kunz and sentenced to decades in prison. Even then, the case remained controversial. Jacobs has consistently maintained his innocence, claiming he was wrongfully accused. Some believe the conviction finally delivered a sense of justice, while others argue that too many questions remain unanswered. At one point, when he became eligible for parole, Jacobs made an unexpected decision. He refused it. Instead of accepting release, he chose to remain in prison, reportedly stating that he would rather serve the rest of his sentence than return to the outside world under those conditions. The murders of the Kunz family remain one of the most unsettling cases in Wisconsin's history. A quiet farmhouse, a reclusive family, a brutal and calculated crime, and a suspect whose guilt continues to be debated to this day.